and I'm the brand ambassador for Penfolds here in Singapore. And today we're coming to you from the JW Marriott at South Beach at the wonderful Stag's Room. And I'm very lucky to be joined today by Bobby Tonelli and Edward Russell. And today we are going to be talking through how to differentiate between different styles of wine. So we've got a Shiraz, a Cabernet, and a Shiraz Cabernet. And guys, today I'm going to be talking you through how we assess the wine, smell it, taste it, and most importantly, tell the differences. But first, just to ask you guys, I've got quite a lot of wine knowledge. I've spent a lot of my time drinking and enjoying wines, so it's something that runs through my veins, but it would be good to find out what's your level of wine knowledge. Bobby, I'll start with you.
You know, I guess, I'm Italian heritage, so wine has always been part of my life as a kid. When I wasn't even supposed to be drinking it, I was drinking it from my grandfather. But I've gone to various different wineries in Napa Valley, you know, so I did a lot of those tours, everything else like that. Then I've been to Italy, I've gone to a couple wineries there. So I love Italian wines like Chianti's and Sassicaia when you get a chance. But yeah, you know, things like that, yeah.
Excellent, yeah. So what I was saying is that generally we've got two varietals here, Shiraz and Cabernet. If you say you like Italian wines, they tend to be quite vibrant, quite a lot of spice to them. I think Shiraz might be more of your ticket today. We'll obviously try through and taste those, but the one thing I always say, the number one thing to know about wine is what you like. So it's great that you've already had a chance to know what you enjoy and those sorts of styles, but Ed, how about yourself? Have you got a level of knowledge?
Same thing as Bobby, I know what I like, and I do like wine. Grew up in England but then moved to Australia, obviously a huge wine culture there, and I kind of started on beer and then moved to wine as a kind of healthier option, I guess. Chianti, Bordeaux, Rioja, probably my red wines of choice. But out of the three you mentioned, a Cab Sav is probably my favorite, I'd say.
Excellent, cool. So I mean, the ones that you're talking about there are a little bit richer, a little bit more structured, particularly things like Rioja have got oak to it. So today when we're having a look at these varietals, we'll talk about how different they are, but also the winemaking techniques that can also add things. So that's, I think, a nice way for us to lead into talking about how we assess wine. So what I'll do is I'll just show you guys what I do when I smell and taste and assess wines, because you can actually tell quite a lot from a wine before you even drink it. So you'll always see people doing this and swirling the wine. We don't do it just to look professional. We do it because you can actually tell a lot from wine without tasting it. So the number one thing that we look at is the colour. And if you have a look at, I've got the Bin 28 Kalimna Shiraz in this glass here. Now Shiraz is a great variety that's got a very thick, dark skin to it. It gives you a very deep, rich colour on the wine. So as I look at this, this is almost an opaque purple. So that's why we look at the wine. If we had a lighter wine, like a Pinot Noir, for example, that's got a thinner skin, you'd actually have a lighter colour in the glass. You can almost tell straight away you're in for something quite rich, quite powerful, because you've got this deep, dark colour to it. So then number two is you smell the wine. Your sense of smell, sense of taste, very closely interlinked. So when you have a smell of the wine, you'll already start to pick up some of those aroma and flavour characteristics. So for me, on the Bin 28 Shiraz that we've got here, Shiraz is a grape that has got lots of rich, ripe fruit to it, but it's also got this nice spiciness. So maybe a bit of pepperiness, maybe a little bit of things like aniseed or licorice. And these are all aromas, you know, that you will pick up before you actually go through and taste the wine itself. So of course, the final bit and the most important part is the taste. So what you'll see today when I taste wine, and what I do almost with anything that I drink in life, is that I swirl it around my mouth, because when you're tasting wine, if you just sip it and swallow it, you don't actually open up all of the flavours and all of the characters in the wine. And I almost equate it to, if you think about something like perfume or aftershave, if you get a little drop and you just put it there, you can smell it in this area here. Right. If you get the exact same amount and you spray it, suddenly the whole room can smell it. It's the same, if you get wine in your mouth and you swirl it around, you actually open it up to more of your flavour receptors. So I'll give you an example. So just that thing of just drawing the air through it, bubbles up in my mouth, and suddenly
do you do that for every sip you do? Every...
Almost, but...
So when you're at a dinner, you're like... You're doing that all the time?
When I'm with friends,
okay.
No. Anything
he can get away with it because he's a wine expert.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a great look, I can tell you now. But it's just that idea of actually when you taste, you don't have to do the bubbling bit, but if you just let it just sit in your mouth for a moment longer, you actually start to just pick up a little bit more of the characteristics.
Okay.
So I'll invite you guys. Do you want to pick up the left-hand glass that you've got there, which is the Bin 28 Kalimna Shiraz? Because I say with Shiraz, we've already talked about the colour, but you just have a smell. You know, is there anything particular that's sort of coming through for either of you that you're sort of picking up aroma-wise on there?
It smells spicy. It
Yeah,
smells
it's spicy.
peppery,
Yeah, it's spicy.
And that's the hallmark of Shiraz, and particularly Australian Shiraz. Big, ripe, rich. You get, I think, also a little bit of a black fruit characteristic to it, so maybe some sort of berries, almost something a little bit jammy, so that sort of blackberry fruit comes through. But it really is that spice that really gives Shiraz, I think, that character and that hallmark. And then feel free to go through, have a sip, and just see whether those aromas also follow through on the palate.
I'm trying to remember what noises he made.
The spice really does come through. Really comes through.
Yeah, you sort of get that pepperiness that plays over the tongue, and then I find it's almost that sweet spice on the finish, which I say, that's things like licorice and aniseed that come through, and that's what I think a lot of people love about Shiraz, is that nice blend of fruit and spiciness. So I still get that sort of sweet dark fruit character coming through, but that spice really is that lovely aftertaste, and that's why people fall in love with Shiraz, particularly Australian Shiraz like we make at Penfolds, because it's got that richness, but I think that spice is something that really draws people in.
If you're pairing it with food, you would need, I guess, something quite powerful that you're eating to not get muted by the wine.
Absolutely, yes. This idea of food and wine matching, again, we try not to put too many rules, but the idea of powerful flavour in the wine, yes, you're going to need something richer, something more powerful in terms of your food flavours. So one thing that we find here that works quite well is actually think about maybe the sauce or the seasoning, not so much the protein. You could have Shiraz with chicken if you wanted to, but you don't want to do it with a light grilled piece of chicken that's just got a bit of lemon and pepper. What you might want to do is something that's been stewed, that's maybe got sort of a creamy sauce to go with it. Suddenly powerful flavours, rich texture, that's going to work with a rich, more powerful style of wine. So that's kind of the rule of thumb I have, is don't try and put light wine with heavy food and heavy wine with light food, because you are going to overpower in one way. And say muted's a great way, that suddenly your palate gets knocked out by one of them, and it's very hard to pick up.
But that's interesting, because normally, you think white meat, white wine, red meat, red wine.
Definitely.
It doesn't have to be like that.
No, because I mean, I think that's the thing. If you're talking purely about the protein, then yes, you know, you do have a lighter texture and flavour to seafood and white meats, and you've got a richer, more, I guess, savoury, umami flavour with those red meats. But when you think about seasoning and sauces, that's something where you can turn it on its head, and you can have rich, full-bodied red wines with those lighter proteins, but you do have to have that powerful component, which is usually made up by seasoning or sauce. So, excellent. So, Bob, you're saying you like your Italian wines, Chianti styles, you know, that spice, is that something that's resonating for you?
Yeah, it is. It's quite nice, actually, And this has got like a medium body to it, if I'm right.
Yes.
It's not too heavy, but it's just nice. It's that kind of in-between. It's a very enjoyable wine.
Absolutely. And the thing about the Bin 28 and what we talk about with red wines as well is this idea of tannin. And tannin's not a flavour, but it's the thing that dries your mouth out and kind of that you do need to match food with. A medium-bodied, smoother style like the Bin 28 has got less tannin to it. So you are going to get that smoothness, that softness, that more medium-bodied. And I think that works well with the fruitiness and the spiciness.
Okay.
But what we can do now is we can have a look at the second wine, which is our Bin 407 Cabernet Sauvignon. So Cabernet Sauvignon, similar to Shiraz, this is another dark-skinned, thick-skinned grape. You're not going to see much colour difference between the Shiraz and the Cab. They're both very, very dark. But when I smell the Cabernet, one thing we'll note with the Cabernet Sauvignon, it's still got that black fruit character, maybe a bit of black currant, but it doesn't have the spiciness of the Shiraz. What you tend to find with the Cabernet is it's a little bit fresher. It's almost got a little bit more of a sort of herbal note to it. So feel free to pick up your glass and just sort of have a smell as I'm sort of talking to you about it. But what I find is that this smells a little bit lighter, a bit more elegant, but a bit more complex. You get the fruit, and then you get that slightly herbal note coming through on it, and that's classic South Australian Cabernet, where we suddenly don't just have fruit, we've also got these slightly, I guess, more elegant and slightly more high tone aromas coming through. And then now when I taste the Cabernet, I suddenly find that there is more of this power, more of this tannin structure coming through on the Cabernet. So it actually feels different in the mouth, but you should also see some of these different flavours coming through when compared to the Shiraz as well.
more of a tartness to it. Maybe I'm saying the wrong words, but it has a bit of a tart.
No, it's exactly right. So Cabernet also has got higher natural acidity to it than Shiraz. So say that tartness, that freshness, that's something that almost going back to food matching, you now say, hey, this is something that could probably work with, maybe a lamb dish that's got like a herb crust to it or something, because again, you've got a bit more freshness, a bit more of this herbaceous character, whereas the Shiraz, you'll be thinking about maybe something that's a little bit more slow cooked, a little bit more concentrated, because it's going to go with that sweeter, spicier characteristic that comes through on the palate as well.
Question for you, since obviously you're a master of wines of sorts, do you normally choose your wine first and then choose your dish if you're at a restaurant, or do you choose your dish first and then the wine?
That's a really good question. So normally, if I'm at a restaurant, I will go food first.
Yeah.
I'm sort of fortunate enough that I've got a lot of wine at home, and so if I want to just focus on the wine, I'll probably stay in. But I will always think about what wine's available on the menu, and if I go in there and found that they had bin 28 Shiraz, I would probably be already looking at, say, a richer, heavier sauce, something that's maybe got that sort of red wine jus on it or something. Whereas if I saw they had a bin 407, then I might go, ooh, let's have a look and see if they've got lamb, something that's a little bit more herbaceous that will complement it. Yeah. But I would always have a look at the food menu first and see what I like, but then make sure that I'm going to pick a wine. But again, so it comes down to knowing what you like. I know that combination works for me. If I'm there with a group of people, I'll always make sure I poll the populace first, because the last thing I want to do is say, hey, we're having Cabernet today, and then everybody else has got light fish dishes. I'll always make sure that you're pleasing the majority rather than just yourself. But hopefully there, what you can see with that Cabernet is, say, a bit more tannin, a bit more acidity. The wine feels a bit more structured, more powerful in the mouth, and that allows those sort of, I think, slightly fresher black fruit characteristics to come through. The Shiraz was probably a little bit more concentrated. The Cabernet is probably a little bit more fresh, a little bit lighter, but again, it's got more of that tannin, more of that structure on the palate. So the last thing I'll get you to do before we move on to the third wine is I was actually say just pick up both glasses and just have a smell of the Shiraz, then you have a smell of the Cabernet, and just by going back and forth, hopefully it really helps highlight those differences between the two wines. The
spice kicks in on the Shiraz.
Because your nose is sort of more used to the herbal and the black fruit character on the Cabernet, then suddenly you dip back into the Shiraz and you're like, whoa, there's that spice box character coming through. And then I find when I go back to the Cabernet, suddenly a little bit more of that eucalypt, that mintiness, that herbaceous characteristic is a little bit more evident. And the same thing on the palate, when you go back and taste them again, you might find that the smoothness and the spiciness on the Shiraz is a little bit more evident. Then you go back to the Cabernet and suddenly you get a bit more of that fresh black currant and a little bit more of that tannic structure starts to kick in.
I feel the Cabernet Sauvignon is a bit more accessible, say, away from food if you just want to come home, have a glass of wine.
I was thinking the same thing, you're right.
It's more of a chilling, relaxing one. It's not going to assault your senses like the Shiraz.
I was thinking the same thing, like without food, just go home and just chill. That's the one,
And that's that richness and the power of the Shiraz that people love, because again, in a food sense, it really works with bold flavours, and this is probably a little bit more of that dinner table style, whereas that 407, as you say, just open it up, nice glass of red before a meal or something, it's just got that accessibility, that freshness to it. So, brilliant. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the third wine. So this is where we've blended these two grapes together. So of course in winemaking, we've got individual grape varieties that we've just tried there, but then we've got this idea of blending two grapes together because you want them to become effectively better than the sum of their parts.
Sure.
So with the bin 389, this is probably one of the most famous wines that Penfolds produces. It's also known as Baby Grange. It's one of the most collected wines in Australia, and it's always been this lovely combination of Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz. The idea being that we want to bring, I guess, that freshness and maybe that tannin and structure from the Cabernet, but we also want that spiciness and that richness of fruit coming from the Shiraz. So by vinifying them separately, but then maturing them together and blending them, our winemakers should hopefully get something where both of those grapes are locked together really nicely, and we should be able to smell and taste the two there. So again, I'll invite you to pick up the third glass and just have a smell and a taste of that, and just see, hopefully, what characteristics out of each of those grape varieties you can pull out.
Do you feel this blending of grapes is more of an Australian thing? I mean, the way that they name them, at least, you know, in Australia, you got Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz. They always like to just mash as many things together sometimes, don't they?
I think one thing you find with Australian wines and New World in general is the labelling. We will say what grapes are in there. So if you think about the vast majority of the classic European wines, they're all actually blends. So Bordeaux is Cabernet and Merlot, almost universally, with 3 other grapes that they're allowed to use.
Right.
Rioja is actually Grenache, Tempranillo, and a grape called Graciano that they can use. But because they name it after the region, people don't sort of get that indication on the label straight away that it's a blend. So blending is actually very common in the wine world. You'll find that almost everywhere will have blended wines as part of their traditional makeup. Chianti, as you've mentioned, Sangiovese is the key grape in there, but Sangiovese can actually have white grapes in there as well. And traditionally, the law said you had to have all of these different grape varieties in there. So a lot of the tradition of Europe is encapsulated in the regional labelling, like Bordeaux, like Rioja. With Penfolds and with generally Australian wines, we don't have the laws that stipulate you must make these wines in one particular area and adhere to a set amount of laws. So by labelling by varietal, we feel that actually gives the consumers more information to actually say, oh, I know I like Shiraz, so I can go and pick this up. If you're in France, to go and get a Shiraz, you might want to go and get a Hermitage, which is 100% Syrah. But there's not many labels that will actually tell you in France that this is 100% Syrah. So if you're not aware that that region has that grape variety, then you might be a little bit at sea when you're trying to find a grape variety that you enjoy. Whereas varietal labelling is something that Australia has done for a long time. And I think it actually hopefully allows people to pick out what they enjoy. And then, of course, if we blend the grapes together, it allows people to say, oh, actually, I really like Shiraz. Not so sure about Cabernet, but maybe it's a bit of a stepping stone. They can say, well, let me try it as a blend rather than just stick to 100% Shiraz the whole time.
Right. Yeah, it makes it more accessible, actually, when you know exactly what's going into it. But I mean, Australians will just either create an acronym or just shorten anyway, so an SSB or a Cab Sav,
absolutely,
whatever's easy to say.
Yeah, so it's, in Australia, we don't want to waste too much of our breath. We
just want to get into the wine.
Exactly, yeah. So again, of course, in Australia, a lot of people refer to bin 389. They won't say bin 389 Cabernet Shiraz, but people know that bin 389 is a Cab Shiraz because it always has been and always will be. So there's definitely tradition within our labels, but it's not like the European ones, which are much more about the regions. But it's, that's always part of that navigation of wine. The more you learn, the more you taste, and that's what I always say to people. The number one thing you can do about wine is taste as much as you can, because that's where you build up your own repertoire, that's where you get to understand your own palate the best, and that's where you can suddenly say, hey, I've discovered a new grape variety I like, or actually, I've tried Cabernet 5 times, and every time it's a bit too tannic, it's a bit too heavy for me. Yeah. That's your own mind, that's your personal taste, and that's the most important thing. Nobody wants to open up a bottle of wine that they don't enjoy. I say life's too short to drink things you don't enjoy. So hopefully by that varietal labelling, and for us in particular, the bin numbers, we know that people suddenly know, hey, I love the bin 28 style of Shiraz. Yeah. Because even within a single grape variety, you could get different expressions of the same grape variety. If it comes from a different region, if the winemakers put it in a different type of oak, whether it's American oak or French oak. So again, by knowing that one number, that's what we find in the Penfolds range, is that we've got people who just say, I don't even need to say I like Shiraz. I just like bin 28. And every vintage, our winemakers would actually try to make that style of wine as close to the original as they possibly can, so you don't get these big variances in style from vintage to vintage.
I see.
Yeah. So why is this one known as the Baby Grange more instead of the bin number then?
So Grange is our icon wine. In Australia, I'm sure it's a wine legend. Most people have had a bottle of Grange that was for a retirement or a 50th birthday or something like that. Bin 389 is a wine that actually gets the 1-year-old Grange barrels passed down to it. So we make Grange and we mature it in a 100% American oak, all brand new. When we've taken the wine out of those barrels, they're then 1-year-old American oak barrels, and we use those for bin 389. And the other thing is, when our winemakers are creating Grange, they actually do a blind tasting. And if something is 99% Grange quality, it doesn't get into Grange. It has to be 100%. But because it's in American oak, and bin 389 has got characteristics similar to Grange, we pass down, or we declassify that Grange parcel all the way down to bin 389. So Bin 389 not only gets those 1-year-old Grange barrels, they also get those declassified Grange parcels that come down that are kind of like a vitamin shot or a kit.
So much more affordable Grange then.
Exactly, yeah. So again, another vernacular in Australian terms is poor man's Grange. So it depends, baby Grange or poor man's Grange, depending how politically correct you're feeling. But genuinely, you're talking about pretty much 1/8 the price of a bottle of Grange in Bin 389. And it's great to be able to effectively have this as the second wine of Grange. If we look at it in a Bordeaux style, you always have your Grand Vin, and then you have your second wine of the Chateau. We very much consider Bin 389 to be like that. But with this, to say we've combined Cabernet and Shiraz.
Yep.
So hopefully, as you sort of smell and taste the wine, you can. On the nose, I find it's got a little bit of that spiciness coming through from the Shiraz, but you've still got a bit of that herbaceousness from the Cabernet. And
It's a little heavier to me.
it is. This is a richer, more powerful style, and I think that's because you've got the weight of the Shiraz, but you've also got the tannin and the structure of the Cabernet. Okay. So we've tasted these in an order that I think hopefully is probably a little bit more accessible. So we start with this sort of the more medium-bodied, smoother Shiraz, then we went on to the slightly richer, more tannic style of Cabernet, and now the Bin 389 is the most powerful, the most robust out of the three. Again, I'm thinking of food wine very much with this. It's
I don't know if this would be a wine that I would have as, let's say, I'd go home, let's say, from a long day at work and have it. I think this might be a little bit too powerful for that.
Yep.
I would need some food or something to sort of offset it.
Yep.
Where I feel the Cab is like a much more, like I think what Edward was saying is like you just get back from a day's work and you just want to go home and just chill. It's nice, it's easy, it's relaxing. But this one you need to put a little bit more work into it.
Definitely, yeah. This is the one where you open it up and you leave it to breathe while you're preparing that rich meal on a Friday night or a Saturday night, or you take it to the restaurant or you order it off the wine list because you know that the food coming to the table is going to be the star of the show almost. I think that there's, as you say, I think there's almost a casualness to the 407. You say that's just get a glass of that, enjoy it at home, whether it's Monday afternoon, whether it's Wednesday evening. Whereas I think, that 389 is a little bit more of an occasion wine, something that you build up to, and a weekend wine maybe more so than a weeknight wine like we've got with the 407.
I do like the fact you get the full bodiness from the Shiraz with less of the spice. Because I got to admit, the plain Shiraz, sometimes I just find it a little bit too spicy. So this is, for me, the best quality of the Shiraz without the quality that I'm not so much a fan of.
Yep, definitely. And that's the thing, that again, we don't just want to get exactly the same flavour as the Bin 28 and exactly the same flavour as the 407 and put them together.
Right.
We couldn't make Bin 389 by pouring the Bin 28 into the 407. They are different expressions of both of those great varieties. So our winemakers will go and pick those Shiraz that have maybe got a little bit more of that weight and a little bit more of that power. Maybe not so much of the spice, so you get a little bit more of the power, and then they go and find Cabernet that maybe's got a little bit less of that tartness, that acidity, that actually allows that Shiraz to keep that smoothness to it as well. So we've definitely stepped up a level in power here from the 28 to the 407 and then to the 389.
Which is your personal favorite?
So I've got to say the 389 has always been my favourite with the Penfolds range. It's a wine that I sort of fell in love with when I first started working for Penfolds, and even before, because I'm from South Australia where Penfolds is made. So South Australian born and raised, and 389 is a wine that has graced family Sunday dinner tables and things for many, many years. So I love the blend of them, but it is a powerhouse wine. It's definitely one of the richest out of our portfolio. But how about you, gentlemen? Did favourite for you, Bobby?
I'm kind of leaning more for a daily one is at the 407. I think for me, I think this would be great if I have, let's say, a big Italian meal or like a steak and pasta and something like that, where I really want a nice wine to complement that. Then I would go for the 407. The 389. The Shiraz is nice, but it's not on my top. It's not. It's not in the top three. I think it's the between the 407 and the 389.
Baby Grange for me, I think. I think I said at the start, I'm a big fan of Rioja. And I'm getting a bit of that in this, the full bodiness, the deepness. Like Bobby with the Shiraz. I don't think I could sit down and just drink all that spice on its own. I need something else with it to temper it. But this for me is pretty perfect.
Absolutely. Well, let's say if you're a fan of Rioja, one of the key things about Rioja is the oak aging that they do. And the Bin 389 has actually got the most amount of new oak out of the three wines that we've tried today. And so that's probably also something that's bringing a bit more of that vanilla, a little bit more of that toasty oaky characteristic as well, which again is something that brings a unique element to the wines. And that's what we always want. Each bin number in the Penfolds range should have its own characteristic and have its own unique identity that makes it easy for people to pick out.
You can probably tell which one's my favourite.
It's something you just keep sipping. It is I've sipped more of this than I've had of any of the wines, and it's not just because it's in my hand, but it just sort of brings you back to it.
It's always, whenever I do tastings or dinners, that's what I always scan the table and I say which glass has gone down the quickest, because that you can't lie with your palate.
It becomes a little bit more, I think, as you drink more of it, it becomes a little bit more palatable. I mean, more smoother. For me, it's a bit more, enjoyable.
Absolutely. And that's the thing with wine. Your palate will change as you eat and drink throughout a meal, and that's why we say it's quite hard to maybe go back from sweet food to then go and have something, really spicy straight afterwards. It's the same with wine, that your palate will get used to having a richer, more powerful wine. So sip number 2 will be different to sip number 1, and it does evolve as you go through. And again, if we went back through any of the previous 2 wines, after trying the 389, you'd probably find that the spiciness was more obvious on the 28. The freshness and herbaceousness was more obvious on the 407, because both your nose and your palate has actually got used to the now much more powerful, richer, denser character that comes with the 389 and the oak on it and everything like that.
So you say you want to keep sipping, it's just very Moorish. You just want to keep going back for more.
And of course, the moment you have food as well, every time you have a bite of food, you kind of almost reset the palate, and so then you can go back again. So, but that, is a bit of a whistle-stop tour through the 2 most prominent and popular grape varieties that we have in Australia and at Penfolds, with Shiraz and Cabernet. They're world-renowned, they're very, very famous, but hopefully today it's just given you a little bit of an idea of firstly how to smell and taste and assess wine, and slurp it like me and look as professional as you want. But just, that idea of smelling and tasting and just picking out, even if it's just 1 or 2 characters, like spice on the Shiraz, that slightly fresher, more crisp element of the Cabernet, and then seeing how they combine on the blend. That's what we want to do. And for the people at home watching, this is what we'd always recommend that you do as well, is, just have a taste, have a think about what you enjoy. And if there's something that you can pick out, like spice, like fruit, then remember that, because having your own library, your own vocabulary of what you like about wine is really going to help you go out and find the best wine, the best glass every time you're out or every time you're buying a bottle to enjoy at home. So please try and replicate this at home. Go out and grab yourself a Shiraz and a Cabernet and have a taste and see what they're like. Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, guys. It's been brilliant to be doing this with Esquire Neighbourhood. I really hope that you've enjoyed the wines, and if anybody would like to grab these at home, they are available here in Singapore at cold storage and fair price, and also on Lazada as well. So thanks very much, and cheers.
Thanks so much, appreciate it.
Thanks so much.